Next, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank village of Tel held a funeral today for 4 men killed by Israeli forces. Some 20 Israeli settlers entered the village on Friday and clashed with residents of Tel who were defending their property. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's office said it condemns the resurgence of violence across the West Bank. Well, joining us now is Nomi Bar-Yaacov, international negotiator and a fellow at the Global Fellowship Initiative at the Geneva Center for Security Studies. Nomi, great to have you with us on the program today. Thank you so much for your time. Now, we've seen, waves of violence in the West Bank, especially since the start of the war in Gaza. But when we take these recent attacks, how do they compare to what we've seen in the past?
Well, thank you very much, Jenny, for having me on your show. They are one more very dangerous step along a ladder to total overtake of by the Israeli army of the West Bank. I mean, since the 7th of October, or maybe since the 6th of October 2023, since extreme minister who's from an outpost, which is an illegal settlement also by Israeli standard, by Israeli law, Zvi Sukkot, since he took his forces to Hawara village in the West Bank on the 6th of October, there has been a movement aiming to tip the Palestinians into a third intifada, any excuse for the army to take over the entire West Bank and annex it. So we are very, very close to that point, and it's a major escalation what happened yesterday. It should be noted that the instigator, B'nayahu Melet, the settler from the outpost that was whose arms were taken and who was shot dead, he was on President Joe Biden's list of sanctioned settlers. So he was a very well-known figure in instigating violence. He wasn't some bystander, as some of the local reporting is saying that the settlers were on a quote-unquote tour. This was clearly a provocation with a short-term goal of inflicting harm and damage on the Palestinians, with a midterm goal of ethnically cleansing the West Bank from Palestinians, especially in areas B and C under Oslo, and with a long-term goal of annexing the West Bank.
So a major provocation, as you say, Nomi, but the IDF's chief of staff has actually come out and condemned the settler violence, and yet we're seeing almost no let-ups in the violence and barely any convictions. What does that say to you?
Well, I think that very sadly, the Israeli army is hand in hand here with the settlers. They haven't set boundaries to the settlers. You often see the Israeli army being called in to try to calm a situation down, but they very rarely have the will to do so. In this particular case, it has to be noted that the settlers, led by this B'nayahu Melet, who's a very well-known instigator of violence, now dead, it has to be said that they didn't seek the army's permission, which they should have done, in order to go into Tel, into this Palestinian village near Nablus. So the army was not aware of it. The army was called in later, and indeed one of the army's majors from Herzliya was also killed. But it has to be mentioned that about 8 Palestinians have been killed in sur place, in Tel at the time. And on average, according to OCHA, according to the United Nations Office of Humanitarian Affairs in the West Bank, since the beginning of this year, on average, there have been 6 Palestinian deaths a day. And that's a huge, I mean, I don't know if that's every single day, but certainly there have been attacks targeting a large number of Palestinians. This particular year has been the worst. 2006 has been the worst year ever in the history of the West Bank. I think we have to really look at not just the numbers, but at the pattern of what these illegal settlers are doing. They're taking over land, they're taking over farms, they're stealing cattle, they're stealing livestock from the Palestinians, and they are trying to connect the entire West Bank with these illegal outposts. So the reason I say illegal outposts as opposed to illegal settlements is that the settlements are illegal under international law, but not under Israeli law. The outposts are those sort of caravans put up in on hilltops that are also illegal under Israeli law. So it's a kind of a certain step up, and in terms of the current plan. But the current government is very clear in its plan to overtake the West Bank. In fact, Prime Minister Ben-Gvir said, the Minister of Internal Security said after this incident yesterday that his plans for, or his wish for the West Bank is that it's going the same way as Gaza. And we all know what's happened in Gaza.
So let's talk more about those plans that you alluded to just there, Nomi. So the Israeli military has announced it's preparing a large-scale counter-terror operation in the West Bank with reports of troops surrounding Nablus. What does the IDF mean by this major operation? I mean, what can we expect?
Well, they've already arrested over 100 Palestinians in the Nablus area. They have shut down, they have given a curfew, basically. They've said cars have to leave the Nablus area by 6 p.m. local time, which is 5 p.m. Paris time, which actually that's now. So they've closed the checkpoints, the military checkpoints around Nablus. So that means that any car that, and there were the kilometers and kilometers of cars trying to get home. So anyone that wasn't able to go in or out, because it's sort of obviously closed both ways, is just going to either have to sleep in their car or in the fields, or take refuge at some kind Palestinian local person who's going to open their houses to them. And that's been happening quite a lot. You've just seen Palestinians opening their homes to those who are stuck due to the army curfews. And the major checkpoint just outside Ramallah is closing in at 8 p.m. local time, which is 7 p.m. Paris time. So, and that again, you saw many kilometers of cars being stuck. So the army is closing ahead of a major operation. And I think you can expect that there will be, as I said, already 100 Palestinians have been arrested. I suspect that there will be more arrests. And the big question is, what are the Palestinians going to do? And is this going to be the tipping point that will basically lead to an all-out third intifada, which is what many of the ministers in the current Israeli government want. Netanyahu wants any excuse to postpone the elections. I think his silence is noteworthy, and it basically amounts to complicity with the settlers and his messianic right-wing ministers that are instigating this.
Nomi, so then what is exactly Benjamin Netanyahu's intention here? Or rather, how does his actions, or how do his actions fit into his calculations ahead of the general elections in October that you just mentioned?
Well, the elections are scheduled for the 27th of October. This is the last date possible in the calendar to hold elections according to Israeli law. And Netanyahu will do everything within his power to try to ensure that elections don't take place. So he will sow chaos wherever he can. Easier to sow chaos close to home than further afield. And so that's exactly what we're seeing now. We're seeing, as I said, we're at a tipping point.
Nomi, unfortunately, we are out of time, but very, very interesting to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for your in-depth analysis and your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Next.